Okay, so let's talk about a vote at the United Nations on March 25th, 2026. This wasn't just some routine procedure. This was a vote that was about redefining centuries of history. And in doing that, it drew some pretty sharp new lines between global powers. We're going to break down exactly what happened and why it got so incredibly heated.
The final vote count tells you everything you need to know. It's not just a set of numbers. It's practically a map of the world's deepest disagreements on this topic. You had this massive wave of support on one side, clashing with some very powerful and very principled opposition on the other.
So 123 nations, they all voted yes. That's a huge majority, right? And this was really spearheaded by the African group, who basically argued that this was way more than just a vote. It was a reckoning with history that was long, long overdue.
And then on the other side, just 3 nations voted against it: the United States, Argentina, and Israel. And their no vote is really interesting because it signaled a major disagreement, not so much with the history itself, but with the legal consequences of this declaration.
Then you have this big group right in the middle. 52 nations decided to abstain, and this group included a lot of former colonial powers in Europe. They were sort of stuck, They agreed with the spirit of the whole thing, but they were really worried about the specific legal language being used.
So what was it in this resolution that caused this huge global split? It really all comes down to this one powerful sentence. The text doesn't just say the slave trade was a tragedy. No, it recategorizes it as one of the most serious crimes against humanity, which puts it in a totally unique legal and moral box.
All right, so let's dig into the yes vote. Why were so many countries pushing for this? Well, the case was led by Ghana on behalf of the African group, and for them, this was about so much more than just words on a page.
For all the supporters, this was really a moral no-brainer. They saw it as a chance to finally, officially, stand on the right side of history. They called it a rampart against forgetting. This wasn't just about looking backward. It was about trying to create a path forward towards real healing through what they call reparatory justice.
And they were very specific with the wording here. This wasn't some vague, fluffy statement. The whole point was to reframe the slave trade as this unique crime with lasting structural consequences that are still felt today. And that, they argue, demands concrete actions, like reparations, to actually address.
So this brings us to the really fascinating question. Why on earth would some of the most powerful nations in the world either vote against or just abstain from a resolution condemning slavery? It seems obvious, right? Well, the answer isn't about morality. It's all about legality.
And this really breaks it down perfectly. For the US, it was a hard no on the whole idea of reparations for historical wrongs. For a lot of European nations, they were worried about applying today's laws to yesterday's events. But the big concern they both shared was this idea of creating a hierarchy of crimes. They were afraid that if you label this one thing the most serious, you're unintentionally saying that other genocides and atrocities are somehow less serious. And that's a very tricky road to go down.
The whole legal fight really comes down to this concept, jus cogens. Think of it as the absolute, non-negotiable, bedrock principles of international law. The supporters said the slave trade clearly violated these. But the opponents fired back, saying, hold on, you can't just apply a 21st century legal idea to the 18th century. Their point was that, as horrific as it wasn't actually illegal under the international laws that existed at the time.
Now, the resolution's authors, they did not buy that argument at all. Ghana's foreign minister basically said that these legal, technical details were just being used to bury history and hide the truth. He insisted the goal was never to rank tragedies, but to finally and fully acknowledge this specific one so everyone could start down a path toward reconciliation. But this whole fight wasn't just happening inside the UN. Oh no, the resolution sparked some really sharp criticism from outside observers, who came at this from a completely different and pretty challenging perspective.
One of the most pointed critiques came from an entity known as Regencyber, and they basically wanted to reframe the entire conversation, arguing that the UN was focused on the wrong thing entirely.
Their argument was stark, and you can see it right here. They said, before wanting to repair the mistakes of the past, repair those of the present. This view pretty much positioned the UN's whole focus on historical injustice as a distraction from ongoing conflicts, and they specifically mentioned Palestine. It's a powerful reminder that these debates about history, they never, ever happen in a vacuum. Okay, so we've talked about the symbolism, the heated debate, but what does this resolution actually ask countries to do? Is it just a statement, or is there a real plan here?
Well, it does outline a pretty clear path forward. Now, it's not legally binding, so countries don't have to do this, but it calls for a real dialogue on reparations, for considering official apologies, for returning cultural artifacts, and, this is a big one, for making sure the comprehensive history of slavery is taught in schools everywhere.
And this is why it all matters so much today. The Declaration's supporters are drawing a direct line from the past to the present. They believe you can't possibly solve today's huge problems like systemic racism, inequality, and underdevelopment without directly confronting where they came from, the 400-year history of the slave trade. The past, they argue, is never really past.
So the vote is cast. The declaration is made. It's an undeniably powerful symbol. But as the world starts to grapple with all the legal and moral fallout, the really big question is still hanging in the air. Can words on a page actually begin to heal the wounds of centuries? It really feels like the real work is only just beginning.